Today, we're diving into a story that's, well, it's both a heartbreaking mystery and a really stark lesson in safety. We're going to walk through the official investigation to understand how a man could just vanish from a massive oil rig right in the middle of a brutal North Sea storm. And that's really the core question here, isn't it? It's a question that everyone from rescue teams to investigators, and of course, a grieving family, has been forced to ask. To even begin to find an answer, we have to go back to that cold, stormy day in January.
All right, so to really get a grip on what went wrong, we need to paint a picture of what was happening out there.
So picture this. It's January 22nd, 2023. The VALARIS 121, this huge jackup rig, is being towed from one spot to another. And they're not just dealing with a little chop. They are smack in the middle of some really rough seas. You've got 54 people on board just trying to get through it.
And this chart really puts some numbers to it. I mean, we're talking about wind speeds cranking up to 30 knots. That's almost 35 miles an hour. And waves swelling to 3 meters. That's nearly 10 feet high. These weren't just swells. These waves were big enough and powerful enough to actually wash over parts of the main deck.
And right in the middle of all that chaos, one of the crew, a 50-year-old veteran crane operator, a guy with more than 16 years of experience, was about to walk into a hazard that, tragically, nobody saw coming. So, to figure out what happened, to piece this whole tragic puzzle together, investigators had to meticulously reconstruct the man's final hours. Now, this timeline, which was pieced together from what his colleagues said and from his phone records, it just paints a picture of a totally normal day, despite the storm. He sends a good morning text to his girlfriend, he's laughing and joking with his buddies at lunch, he's doing his job. At 2 o'clock, he and his work partner are out doing deck checks and actually get their boots soaked by a wave. Then, at 2:45, he gets up from the smoking room, walks out, and that's it. He's never seen again. And this is what makes it so much more heartbreaking, right? He wasn't upset, he wasn't acting strange. His colleagues said he was in a great mood, just excited about getting home and making plans for his time off. This wasn't a man in some kind of personal crisis. This was a guy with a future he was looking forward to. And it's really important to stress, this wasn't some rookie. We're talking about a seasoned pro, a guy known for being super careful and attentive to safety. And that fact right there makes what happens next all the more shocking. So at first, the search for the crane operator was just a complete mystery. Where could he have gone? But then, about an hour after he was last seen, a colleague stumbles onto a clue that just completely changes the entire investigation. Okay, so his work partner, the assistant crane operator, is in the changing room, just getting his gear on, and all of a sudden, he hears this loud, heavy bang. The kind of sound a huge wave makes when it just slams into the rig's steel frame. So he's curious, right? He looks out a window that's right next to an exterior door, and what he sees, it's horrifying. A whole section of the steel walkway, about 3 by 4 feet, right outside that door, is just gone, like it was punched out, leaving this gaping hole straight down to the violent sea below. That hole, it was a sheer drop of about 20 feet. 20 feet straight down into that churning North Sea. And just like that, the mystery of the missing man had a terrifyingly plausible answer. So the big question becomes, how in the world does a heavy steel grating, something designed to withstand the offshore environment, just get punched out by a wave? Well, the investigation focused in on exactly that. And the answer, according to the official report, wasn't just some single freak accident. No, it was more like a perfect storm, a chain reaction of failures, both in the procedures people were following and in the actual hardware itself. So first, let's talk about the procedural gaps. The investigation discovered that no formal safety analysis, what they call a JSA, was ever written down for those deck checks. An order not to use that specific exterior door, that was just verbal. There were no signs, no physical barrier, nothing. And this is a big one. The buddy system, which is a core safety rule out there, it just wasn't being followed right when he went missing. And then you've got the technical failure, which is just, wow. The manufacturer's instructions for installing that grating were crystal clear. Every single panel needs a minimum of 4 independent fasteners. You're not supposed to share fasteners between panels, period. But what did the investigation find on the VALARIS 121? They found that's exactly what had been done. Now, this might seem like a small detail, a minor shortcut, but it had a massive impact. It fundamentally compromised the strength of that whole walkway. It left it incredibly vulnerable to the upward force of a big wave. It was, quite literally, a disaster just waiting to happen. Look, at the end of the day, a man lost his life, and a family was shattered. The only thing you can do to honor that kind of loss is to make absolutely sure the lessons are learned so that this never, ever happens again. So, the official conclusion is that the crane operator most likely stepped out of that door, maybe, as his colleagues thought, just to get a better cell signal to talk to his girlfriend, and he stepped right onto that weekend grating. Whether he was on it when it gave way or a wave swept him off right after, the result was the same. So, what's the fix? Well, the investigation laid out a really clear roadmap to prevent this kind of tragedy. It calls for a full, fleet-wide review of every single grating installation. It demands better, updated safety procedures for rig moves, and it mandates that written risk assessments are done for all non-routine jobs. It also pushes for stronger missing person protocols, and this is so important, making sure these lessons are actually communicated across the whole company. See, this story isn't just about one faulty piece of metal. It's about how a series of small, seemingly insignificant shortcuts, a verbal warning instead of a sign, a shared clip instead of 4 separate ones, how they can all line up to create one single point of catastrophic failure. Real safety isn't about one single rule. It's about having a robust, redundant system where all the layers work together to protect people. And that really leaves us with a pretty sobering question to think about. And not just for the offshore industry, but for any workplace. How many critical safety rules in our own work lives are just informal understandings? Things that are undocumented, things that are just a verbal warning away from becoming the next link in a tragic chain of events?